Okay, this is an update on the French door project. The next step is adding the trim on the exterior, which I've been working on. But before I mention that, I wanted to mention that I also installed the hardware. Everything went fine according to the hardware instructions, with the exception of the latch. The way it came, the latch was turned 180 degrees, which would not function properly because it has to approach with the slant. I looked online and I did find instructions on how to insert a screwdriver into that hole. Then by wiggling it in a way that wasn't completely clear, you can actually turn this latch around, and that's called changing the handedness of the door, right-handed to left-handed, because this comes with either the right side active or the left side active. Okay, I just thought I'd mention that. They do have Andersen does have a video on doing that, but it's not clear exactly what the guy's doing when he's wiggling it. And when I tried it, it was the same way. I really wasn't sure, but I stuck with it, and I did got it to turn. Okay, now on the trim, I've been using cedar trim, 3.5 inch, and here's a piece that I've cut, and I've back primed it. Okay, the main thing I wanted to do was to prime the ends, the end grain. Okay, well, while I had it and I was priming the end grain, I went ahead and I primed the entire back side. This cedar comes with surfaced on one face and 2 edges. The back side is rough. Now you can see here, I've actually made a rabbet cut with a router on the back side, and I'll show you the reason for that. The reason for that is that this gasket that comes with this does not sit flat. And in some areas in particular, it really sticks out as much as probably 1/4 inch. And when you push this door in, when you're installing it, there is not a stop on the sill, for example. There's no gasket on the bottom side. So as you push it in place, the whole thing could be either further in or less further into the actual opening. There's nothing to stop it except this gasket. So as you're leveling it up, part of this gasket might get pushed in, and that it could get pushed, it'll get put out a little bit. It's out at an angle. On the top, it was particularly bad, and I had seen somebody online talk about relieving the edge on the bottom side where it would have to get in the way of that gasket. He actually was making some sort of a diagonal cut, but I decided to take 1/4 inch off of that with my router so that I could not worry about this material lying flat. And up the top board I've already installed, okay? And that's where it was the worst. So here I'll show you my installation. I put a center line on the board, and I made a center line on here so that I could get it centered. I cut it according to the required dimension, but I didn't want it, if it wasn't centered, okay, so it wouldn't line up properly with the other trim. Okay. Now I will say that in the past I have bought the high-grade cedar for my trim, but because of inflation this time I didn't. I got the kind at Lowe's, or it was Home Depot maybe. But anyway, it's surfaced on 2 edges and 1 side. It does have knots, but I am painting it, and I'm hoping that that will be acceptable. In this case, 2 of the knots on this board were actually loose, so I filled them with epoxy. I'm using screws to attach this, and I'm countersinking the hole. I only drill a hole in the trim board, not in the side of the house. And according to the instructions, you need to leave 1/4 inch gap between the trim board and the side, okay, which I did here. The way that I set that up to leave 1/4 inch was by taking this 1/4 inch strip of hardwood, which I had left over from hardwood floor project. That's the so-called reversing strip. It just happens to be 1/4 inch. I placed that between the trim and the window. Okay. In this case, this longer board had a slight bow in it. So before fastening it, and I've fastened it at 2 other spots now, I did clamp it, okay, just to take a little bit of the bow out, and you can see that is not tight against the strip there, but it is tighter in other locations, on the 2 ends in particular. So I did that. I'm going to put in the 3rd screw, then I'll take out this strip, then I'll put the one on the other side, and I'll be finished with this step. Okay, there's another step, 35, in which they tell you to put a backing rod into the 1/4 inch gap and then actually caulk that with the Andersen sealant. Okay, and I will do that, but not on this particular section. Okay, I took out the parting strip, so I have the 1/4 inch gap in place. I'm going to add 2 more screws here, but I don't need that strip in place to add those extra last 2 screws. And one thing that I should mention, that I have more experience with this drill driver now, and I noticed that it does have 2 speeds. I had inherited this, and I didn't really read the manual when I started using it. It had been set to 2, which is actually for drilling. For screws, they recommend 1, which it turns slower. And this does have a trigger control, and when it's on 2, it is easy for the speed to get away from you, particularly as you're pushing hard with it. And I'd have to say that this is probably why I stripped out one of the screws when I was installing the door. I had it on 2. It was the screw that was up here, so I was really up on a ladder. And as I was trying to push into that screw head, I didn't have a lot to back me up, because I was on the ladder, and I didn't push into it hard enough, and I had it on 2, and the speed of it just kept getting away, and that really stripped out the head of the screw. Anyway, that's a lesson learned. Okay, I'm not going to put the other piece on in this section of the video, but later on when I do the next section, when I put the backing rod in, I'll have that all on and primed. Okay, thanks.